Fidwog lies on the southeastern border of Talk, the Crusades' birthplace, and so it was one of the first of the royalist states to face the armies of Ali Kinder. Yet now, more than 20 years later, it remains unconquered and defiant. After 20 years of desperate war, the arch-reactionary Fidwogians field an army of seasoned veterans. Years of hard experience has trimmed the fat from their offspring, and many a young Iskerton, dreaming of glory for himself and his family, has learned his trade in a hard school, or died trying. Out of all of the royalist armies faced by the Crusade, the Fidwogian Fidal is its closest match in skill and daring. It is regrettable that the Crusades' center of gravity in these latter days resides principally in the west, upon the Koftiran front, and so few reliable histories of the Fidwogians have been obtained. This film strip will therefore be short, by unfortunate necessity, but it is hoped that future works will expound more upon these small but hard-fighting corps. Fidwog, though second in prominence to Koftir among the surviving royalist powers, has a population greater than that of the latter, bolstered by 6 million refugees from the overthrown royalist kingdoms of the East to 39.5 millions. Yet, neighboring Tok, the heart of the Crusade, is larger still, with over 60 million inhabitants. But it is not manpower that has enabled Fidwog to survive 20 long years of siege, but rather a combination of geography and martial valor. Western Fidwog, which borders Tok, is dominated by mist-shrouded moors, with the great mountain ranges at their backs. Further north, the high-peaked Great Galt and the rocky karst Badlands are almost impassable to all but their inhabitants. Though crisscrossed with mountain ranges throughout its length, in the east, the country opens up somewhat, with prominent woods and farmland. It is, however, the mountains which are the source of the country's wealth, as they hold rich veins of ore mined by its first families, who in turn pay a tithe to the king. Such is the value of these metals that even the tithings suffice to make Fidwog wealthy beyond the possibility of enumeration. From what little we know of Fidwogian cultural life, there is a clear distinction between Western and Eastern Fidwogians. The former bury their dead in familial subterranean cave tombs, whereas Eastern Fidwogians prefer to be buried in fields and forests, to enable them to appreciate the natural beauty of Alwyd, even in death. Western Fidwogians raise herds of the aggressive and velociraptor-like, but presumably, for reasons which will shortly become apparent, mammalian guylon, whose fermented milk is a traditional alcoholic beverage to the Fidwogians. In wartime, the vicious beasts serve as cavalry mounts in lieu of the kadir more commonly seen elsewhere in Alwyd. It is presumably because of the need to herd the guylon that Fidwogian fidos, also used for martial purposes in wartime, are so large, heavier even than most Fidwogians. A custom that transcends region is that of the Gafen and Han-Gafen, the barreler or half-barreler. Since time immemorial, Fidwogians have converted captured enemy rifle barrels into makeshift canteens for homebrewed scotch, a tradition so completely a part of the national identity that, in modern times, Fidwogian riflers are invariably known as Gafen, while machine gunners, who have more to carry, are called Han-Gafen, because their greater burden necessitates a lesser portion. Physically, the Fidwogians, be they Eastern or Western, are notably smaller than other Quar, and are bound together closely by a fiercely felt intra-clan kinship, boundless self-confidence in their own abilities, and a strong sense of loyalty to the ruling family, the Fredericks. The current king of Fidwog, His Highness Ediphes, sometimes rendered Adolphes, Frederick, the third Lord of the Royal Riches, has 17 sons, most serving in one capacity or another with the Fidal, Fidwog's armed forces. The youngest and most prominent is Prince Cernal William Frederick, in nominal command of the Fidal Overseas Department's Expeditionary Force in Creve. Fidwog has existed under a state of siege almost for the entirety of the Crusade. 7 years after Alwyd seized the reins of power in Talk, Fidwog's southeastern neighbor, the peninsular nation of Akon, also succumbed, depriving the Fidwogians of an ancient trading partner. Had the Akonians been more zealous, the story of the House of Frederick might have ended then and there, but the Akonians have been content to dig a few trenches on their shared border, and little else, much to Alwyd's displeasure. Perhaps had success been denied to the Crusade elsewhere, the martial genius of the Crusade's founder might have been turned upon Fidwog to great effect, but the incredible victories won in the West turned Alwyd's eye away from his neighbor. Though wealthy and populous, Fidwog's terrain mitigated against the development of large fighting tractors, like the Crusader Baliol or the Koftiran Paradin, and the Gwyllon-mounted cavalry, armed with explosive-tipped lances for anti-tractor work, were supplemented largely by small, maneuverable one-quar fighting tractors, like the machine-gun-armed Finridad. While this allowed Fidwog to produce truly massive numbers of tractors, even while under Crusader blockade, it and the need to hold the Agor and By-Stettin fronts against unceasing Talkish pressure left the Fidal incapable of projecting power abroad conventionally. Fidwogian efforts were thus focused on asymmetrical warfare overseas, in the hopes of subverting Crusader allies and drawing off some of the Talkish forces besieging. An initial amateurish effort in Christ in 1771 fomented a popular uprising against the Crusader occupiers, but the rebels turned upon and slaughtered the Fidwogian advisors sent to aid them, rather than return the deposed Honis Mirzadu to the throne, and the ensuing low-level partisan warfare between Christer nationalists and Crusaders had little effect on the wider war. The Fidwogians have always striven to learn from experience, and by 1776, the Fidal Overseas Department was formed, with the specific intent of creating as much difficulty for the enemy as far afield as possible. By 1778, they had succeeded in stirring up revolution in Cresa, drawing off Crusader forces that would otherwise have been bound for the Koftiran front. In 1780, the Dowager of Ceven proclaimed for the royalist cause after Crusader forces withdrew from her nation. With the Crevish army of Inveven Verta and the irregular forces of the Trench Watch, both in disarray, Ceven reeled under an invasion by the nominally Crusader Western Arnyarans and their mighty iron houses from the west, and the powerful mechanized army of the Iscavite Crusaders in the east. The king leapt at the prospect of helping a fellow royalist nation, particularly as Ceven still contained many logistics centers set up to support the failed Grand Army of Kings in 1766, thus easing the burden of supplying the forces in the field. As a sign of the prestige accorded the expedition, Prince Cernal William Frederick was assigned the renowned field commander Canerol Rurch Shoro, a hard charger famous for being that rarity of a lower-class quar promoted to high command in a royalist army. With no real experience of transporting or supplying an army overseas, the initial wave of 4 divisions and 4 brigades was transported largely in requisitioned civilian airships and steamers, and made what was mercifully an unopposed landing at Inesvi, before advancing northeast to the Eratani River basin, where they ran headlong into Iski's hitherto unstoppable advancing tractors. In brutal fighting that saw many units on both sides brought to the brink of annihilation and beyond, the Fidwogians did the impossible. They halted the Iscavite drive to the Eratani River. Now, the 2 armies each seek to exploit the other's open northern flank, with supplies from Fidwog interdicted by Crusader aeronaval forces on Lake Morandi. The FOD in Ceven finds itself far from home, low on supplies, and facing a powerful enemy close to its home base. With Tokish forces falling prey to internecine fighting as the struggle to succeed Ali Kinder begins a long, slow slide towards anarchy and civil war, Fidwog may be forced to choose between exploiting opportunities at home or staving off disaster abroad.